Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for the first cooking demo of 2025. Before we begin today's webinar, Osteoporosis Canada acknowledges the land that our offices, located in Toronto, are on, is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. My name is Tracie Napoli, Director of Fund Development and MARCOM at Osteoporosis Canada, and I will be your cooking demo host today. Thank you to our partner, Get Cracking, for supporting our Cook with OC program. This webinar will provide general information about cooking and food knowledge. It is not intended as individualized health or nutrition advice, but if you have questions about nutrition, consult a physician or registered dietitian. Now, during our cooking demo, as always, we would love to hear from you. So if you have any questions or comments about the recipe today, just click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, or you can enter comments in the chat. And we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can during the webinar within the time available. Nutrition is a key component for strong and healthy bones, and at Osteoporosis Canada, we are working on strategies, resources, and tools like the nutrient calculator to help you make sure you're getting enough of the nutrients needed every day, like calcium, vitamin D, protein, magnesium, and vitamin K. And you can see what each of these nutrients help do to help with good bone formation, tissue repair, and other things that are important for good bone health. Now, the nutrient calculator, there's a QR code there, or you can visit the website at osteoporosis.ca, is this great new tool that we've had that you can log in all the different kinds of foods that you eat during the day, and it will help tell you if you are getting enough of the nutrients, of each of those nutrients needed. Now, Osteoporosis Canada also recommends that whenever possible to get bone building nutrients through food sources. So today's featured ingredient in our recipe is eggs. And did you know that eggs are packed with essential vitamins, minerals, and high quality protein? And a protein is considered high quality when it contains all 9 essential amino acids that can easily be absorbed and used by the body. Now, amino acids are the building blocks that make up protein and play an important role in supporting key bodily functions such as digestion and tissue repair. Eggs contain all 9 of these essential amino acids, making them what is called a complete protein source. Now, we have other recipes on the Osteoporosis Canada website, including this very delicious phyllo egg strudel recipe that we did a cooking demo for last fall. So you can find this recipe and the cooking demo by visiting the website. So today's featured recipe is a smoky lemon egg and quinoa soup. Very delicious. And especially on a cold winter day like today, this is a perfect meal to have. So per serving, we're going to have 100 milligrams of calcium, 11 grams of protein, 302 micrograms of vitamin K, 50 milligrams of magnesium, and 0.8 micrograms of vitamin D. So you can again find this at osteoporosis.ca/recipes, but I will also put the recipe link into the chat. It is now my pleasure to welcome our friend, Emily Richards, who is a professional home economist, freelance food writer, chef, and she's the author and co-author of 11 cookbooks. Emily also writes and develops recipes for print and online publications that include everyday cooking and healthy eating, and she can be found on TV, radio, and webcasts, just like this one. So welcome, Emily. Look at that
Hey, Tracie.
beautiful spread. You would think it's spring, but if you open the door, we know it's not.
I'm trying to bring those spring vibes inside, definitely. And flowers do help. So do some of the ingredients that we're using. But definitely going to warm up with the soup today, which I think everyone can cozy up to.
Absolutely. Well, before Emily dives into the recipe, as she adjusts that lovely purple apron, Yes, we will be giving away another apron today. So if you are on by the end of the webinar and I call your name, you will be the lucky winner of an Unbreakable Osteoporosis Canada apron, and we will ship that to you. So Emily, take it away.
Thanks, Tracy. Thanks everybody for joining me today. It is kind of gray outside, and so soup is definitely on the menu. And I think that soup is great year round for many reasons. It's easy to make. It's a great way to use up leftovers, and it tends to be fairly quick. This recipe, in fact, is quicker than most soups, which I think is an added bonus. And we're using just a few ingredients, which includes eggs. And we're going to start off with kind of the main part of the soup, which is the broth. And we're using vegetable broth. So this is how we're going to keep this soup vegetarian. But if you have chicken broth or any other style of broth at home that you want to use, you definitely can do that. If you are working at a minimum and you want to use some water, guess what? That'll work too. Just season it a little bit. So you can go ahead and do that. And when we talk about broths in soups, we always kind of go, is it homemade? Is it store-bought? It's really what is accessible to you. If you are a lover of making broths, then for sure, whether it's a slow cooker, on the stove, or in your Instant Pot, you can make stocks and broths quite easily. And vegetable broth is actually one of the simplest ones to make because you just have to throw in some veggies with some water. Kind of stay away from kind of those stronger vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower, unless you're going to be using that broth for a soup that includes broccoli and cauliflower. They tend to kind of overtake the flavor. But in this case, if you had some scraps, so onions, garlic, carrots, celery, leeks, even a few peppers in there, if you had just like the trimmings of them, and start it with the broth, or sorry, with water to create that broth. It usually only has to simmer for about 30 minutes. And if you want to add flavor, you can actually roast all those trimmings or veggies first. And when I say trimmings, I mean saving kind of the onion skins and all the ends of what you've trimmed off the carrots or the carrot peels. You could use potato peels. That'll actually give it a little bit of body as well. So there's lots of ways to kind of create your own simplistic vegetable broth. And you can season it as you like. So if you are trying to reduce sodium, you can leave the salt out, or you can look for low sodium varieties of broth in the store as well. So it's really a never ending. I like to look for it on sale at the grocery store so that I can kind of keep it in the Tetra packs ready to go. Or if I have lots of bones left over from a holiday, I like to roast those off and make a broth and freeze it. So you can always have it on hand, which is great. So the first part is getting this broth flavored and hot. So I'm going to start off. This is 6 cups of vegetable broth that I'm starting off with. Make sure that this is on. And we're going to, so if in the title, if you saw smoky and you're thinking, well, what are we using? We're not smoking anything. We're not. We're using smoked paprika. And that has a wonderful smoky aroma and it has a beautiful golden color that it will add to the broth. So just kind of taking it and wafting it in front of your nose, it will give you that beautiful aroma. Some will have, thoughts of tobacco perhaps. Just it has that nice smokiness that goes really well with the other ingredients that we're using. And it kind of makes you feel a little bit like summer, like you're out grilling. Okay. So we're going to add 2 teaspoons into the broth. Now, if you don't have smoked paprika, it is kind of those spices that has kind of been up and coming for a while. So you can find it in the regular spice aisle now. You don't, there was a time when you had to go to a specialty store to look for it. And if you're unsure of the flavor, it's great to go to a bulk store and just pick up a little bit to give it a taste. You can also use regular paprika for this, but I would use a sweet paprika as opposed to a spicy paprika because it would be a little, maybe too spicy. Although if you're a spice lover, it might be the way to go. So this is going to give us a nice kind of golden color and definitely big smoky flavor. Okay, so I'm just stirring that together. And then we're going to add our quinoa. So this is where some of our texture comes into play. And I love having soups with a little bit of texture in them. And quinoa has just, it almost like pops in your mouth a little bit, whether you've had it in a salad or maybe you've had it as a filling in something or a side dish. In soups, it works very similar to as you would use rice. Okay. But you could also use pasta here. The bonus of using quinoa is that it's gluten-free. So if your broth is gluten-free and your quinoa is gluten-free, the rest of the recipe is gluten-free, so you're good to go. And I know oftentimes we're looking for those types of recipes for our family members that we want to make sure that, you know, they get to eat something delicious too. So we are using some quinoa. So when you go to the grocery store, you can find it in bags, you can find it in bulk, and you can find it in different colors. That's the other added bonus. So you can, this is just plain white quinoa. There's red quinoa. There's a tricolor mix with a little bit of black quinoa. They all cook pretty much the same. You can rinse them and then use them. We're using about 1/3 of a cup in this recipe. And the reason why, and same if you were using rice or pasta, it absorbs the broth, so it kind of plumps up a little bit. So if you have leftovers and you want to eat it the next day, it'll start to absorb the broth and doesn't always look like soup. And I know most of us have been there when we've had some sort of starch in our soup and it thickens and it looks like stew the next day. So quinoa really works well here for the texture of the soup. And so I'm going to stir that quinoa in there because this is going to take about 10 minutes to cook it. So if you were using rice, also take about, depending on the rice you're using, if you're using something like jasmine or basmati, those fragrant rices, it'll take about 10 minutes as well. But if you wanted, if you only had long grain rice, that'll take about 15 to 20 minutes. And if you're using a brown or a whole grain rice, it might take a little bit longer. The great part is that you can taste it as it goes. Okay. So I'm just going to let this, I'm going to give it a stir. And then what I forgot to mention is that if anybody has questions about what we're doing today or anything really, just put it in the chat or the Q&A, and Tracie will take a peek every now and again and ask the questions and see if I have an answer for you. I may or may not. I try to have answers. All right, so because this soup is so quick, I didn't really do much prep. And that's what I love about recipes, right? When you can kind of just have something going and keep moving. So as this is going to come to a simmer and cook, we're going to get our other ingredients ready. I just want to make sure that it's on the right heat so we're not going overboard. So we are, if you've noticed what I have in front of me, tulips, which are great, but kale, which is even better. And this is fresh kale. You can buy it in the grocery store, typically in bunches. You can buy it chopped. You can buy baby kale. You can buy regular kale. You could buy dinosaur kale. You can buy black kale. There's so many varieties of kale that you can pick up. I just picked up, again, what was on sale. And so the other option to this is using frozen kale, which I know a lot of people love having on hand because they love throwing it in their smoothies. So this would be a great place if you're already purchasing frozen kale. Don't worry about buying fresh. You can just use the frozen kale here. Okay. So I thought it would be fun. We only need 2 cups just to kind of go through how to trim up this kale. Okay, so 2 cups, believe it or not, is only going to be about 2 or 3 leaves because these leaves are so beautiful and large. And what I like to do is give them a rinse first and pat them dry so that they are ready to go. I often do that with a lot of my produce because I'm going to be using it within the day or two so that I can just grab it and start adding it to the recipe. It makes things a little bit faster during mealtime. So you'll notice that with the kale, there's this kind of big long stem here. And you can start to kind of pull away at it and just pull the delicate leaves right off of it. If you want, you can take a knife and do the exact same thing. But I like to kind of do this with my hand so that I can feel where this stem breaks so that if it's tender enough, it'll just kind of break off. And that's where I'll stop. So oftentimes it'll be a little bit more tender further down. And I still want to use that because that's going to have lots of flavor. And it's going to add some texture to the soup as well. So what do we do with this? This is a lovely kale stalk. Guess what? If you've ever had kale salad, you might have found a lot of this stalk in there, and you can use it in the soup as well. Make sure you, again, give it a good rinse, and I would just chop this finer. That's all, and you can add it, and it'll give you a nice different texture. If you're like, no thanks, Emily, I don't want any stems, you can still keep these around and freeze them because they're great to use under roasts. If you need to lift them a little bit, it just keep them and use it like a little bit of a bridge. And then they absorb all the flavor. And then guess what? They're delicious. Okay. And so I'm going to use the leaves today just because it'll make things go a little bit quicker for me. And I'm just going to, again, pull off the leaves here. And so if you're using baby kale, they're smaller leaves, and they also have smaller stems. So you really don't have to trim anything, which is great. And the frozen kale, it's already, all the work's done for you. It's typically chopped when you buy it, so you don't have to worry too much about that. So with the kale, I'm just going to kind of put these leaves on top of each other, as I would be doing if it was large, collards or spinach or anything like that. Even herbs, you kind of just want to stack on top of each other. And then I'm just going to kind of roll it a little bit here like that. And then I'm just going to do some nice thin cuts like this. And I'm going to go back and just cut it a little bit more so that it's a smaller chop. Okay. So that it's well distributed throughout the soup. Okay. Now, if you are buying a bunch of kale like this and you don't want to deal with it in segments, so by that I mean you're making this recipe and then you're going to make a kale salad, maybe you're going to make a pasta with kale or a kale pesto. Here's my recommendation. Wash it all, chop it all, and then leave it in the fridge chopped or freeze it, and then just pull it out as you need it so that it's all done at the same time. So doing those kind of little meal preps are fabulous, especially if you find some kale on sale, because then you might be picking up more than one bunch. Okay. So I just went back and kind of trimmed that up a little bit, and I only need 2 cups, which is not heavily packed. So I'm not kind of packing this in because it will take over the soup and it will turn into a very much a kale soup, which is delicious, by the way. But in this case, we want it a little bit more as an accent into the soup and adding some of those greens. So if you're already thinking, I'm not making the soup because I don't like kale, guess what? We have substitutions. We always have substitutions because we want you to try the kind of all the components of the soup. I'm just going to give my soup another little stir. It's starting to simmer away here. Think of all those green vegetables that we maybe love. Spinach, Swiss chard, rapini, collards, any of those greens, whether they're fresh or frozen, will work in this soup. So, let's say you have some wilted baby spinach lurking in the refrigerator. This is a great time to use it. Grab a few handfuls and add it to the soup. You might want to chop it up a bit, again, for the same reasons. I've been caught many times having soup and you just have that kind of big, long spinach leaf hanging out of your mouth. Chopping it up will help that and kind of break it up a little bit, okay? So we have our kale chopped up, and we're going to add a little bit of color because we want it to be nice and bright and flavorful. And we're going to use some red pepper. It doesn't have to be red pepper. It could be yellow pepper, orange pepper, green pepper, whatever you happen to have. Guess what? If you have zucchini, you can add that too. So it's wonderful to be able to add those kinds of substitutions in soups. And that's, I think, why people are pulled towards soups often, because they can kind of mix and match. If you wanted to add a harder vegetable like carrots and celery, I would add that right from the beginning with the broth so that they have time to get a little bit more tender. We're using tender vegetables here, so they're not going to need as much time within the broth itself. Okay, so we only need about half a cup of red pepper, which typically is about half a red pepper. This one's a little bit on the larger side, so I might not need all of the pepper. And I'm just going to cut it into strips and then dice it up. Okay, so while I'm doing this, Tracie, do we have any questions or concerns
Oh,
or
no
anything?
concerns.
No
No
concern.
concern.
Well, the concern is you're not here to share the soup with me. That's one
I
concern.
know, I know. We always say, oh, it looks so good. But you know what? Actually, we do have a couple of questions. We did have someone who, Beth, she's like, I have spinach. So yes, you can definitely swap things out. So we'll say it earlier in the cooking demo than we normally do. But if you make any substitutions, just know that the nutrient analysis that we did is based on what we have. And kale is a source of calcium. It's also has a lot of vitamin K in it, but that's fine. If you don't want to eat kale in your soup or you have something else available, just know that there's other vegetables. So also, it's not one meal is going to make or break. It's all about what you do throughout the day. And just also mention the nutrient calculator again. This is where the nutrient calculator helps, because let's say you decide to swap the kale out for spinach, and instead of, you want to add zucchini, like Emily said, you can then kind of see what the nutritional breakdown is. So that's the first one. That's great. And we had a good question about the quinoa. Do you recommend rinsing the quinoa before you use it? I know we've had that question for rice before. What say you, Emily?
It's really, for a lot of people, it's a personal preference. Sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, I forgot to rinse it. Now what am I supposed to do? It's okay. You can still use it. I usually rinse my quinoa first. There's that little bit of coating called saponin on the outside. So just oftentimes when people make quinoa, they feel like it has a bitter taste to it. And so that's typically what it is. There are some that you'll see that's polished quinoa or rinsed quinoa that is on the market as well. So you don't have to. So it really is a personal preference. And in this case, because we're kind of cooking it in the broth, and there's way more broth than quinoa, it's not absorbing it just to plump it up. There's going to be other flavors in there. So if you happen to forget to rinse it, that third cup, it's not a big deal. And it will still taste delicious. So that's I leave it in your hands at home while you're doing it. And oftentimes, to be honest with you, it's that matter of like, oh, I'm putting the quinoa in, and it's just you're trying to get it done and then you forget. So I have done it many, many times, and I still have eaten the quinoa. Um, so yes, that is kind of a personal preference. So I chopped my red pepper. My half a cup is here. And guess what? If you wanted to use, let's say you had a smaller pepper and you wanted to use a whole pepper, please feel free to add the rest of that pepper. Okay, it's going to add that nice little bit of color, which is fabulous. So the next thing we're going to add is our eggs. And we're not adding the eggs right in here. So oftentimes, as soon as people hear eggs in a soup, they think of kind of that egg soup that has the nice, in Italian, it's called stracciatella, which has those little rags of soup that is stirred in. This could turn out that way. We're going to try not to, but if it does, that's okay. But we are going to be adding the soup and in a way where we're tempering the eggs before we add it. And it's very traditional in a lot of egg soups to do that if you're trying to get the body of the egg. And by that, I mean the texture that it provides, that creaminess in the soup. If I wanted more of that kind of pieces of egg floating throughout, I would kind of just stir the eggs right in. So that's kind of the difference with this soup is we're looking for more velvety texture that the eggs will provide. So to that, we're going to add our 4 eggs. So I have my eggs here. These eggs, they always look beautiful in this little ceramic carton, which I love dearly, but I'm not keeping my eggs in the fridge this way. They come in this beautiful carton that is perfect. It protects them really well in your refrigerator, and you want to keep them nice and cold in the refrigerator, okay? And I'm using large eggs. So typically in all the Osteoporosis Canada recipes, we use large eggs, and that is whether they're white or brown, okay? And this is something that I always ask, especially when I'm teaching cooking classes to kids, is who gives what eggs? So who lays brown eggs and who lays white eggs? And for those of you that don't know, white chickens lay white eggs and brown chickens lay brown eggs. Now, specifically, it's their earlobes that is the color of them, but that's a nice generalization so that you know that that's how it works. The other thing is that nutritionally, they're exactly the same. Sometimes when you go into the grocery store, you'll see the different labels of eggs, and that just means that in most cases, it's a different feed that the chickens have, and that just changes the nutritional component slightly in the eggs. But overall, eggs are wonderful to incorporate, and oftentimes you think of them for baked goods, right? Or eggs for breakfast. They have such a multitude of purpose in the kitchen. And in this case, they're going to provide us that really nice creamy texture in the soup. And again, that body that I was talking about. So this recipe has 4 eggs in it, and I'm just whisking it up. And if we use just the eggs, it would be absolutely delicious, but we're going to brighten it up and add some spring into our step. And we're going to add a little bit of lemon. Okay. And I love lemon and egg desserts. One of my favorites is a lemon tart, which is made from lemon curd that has eggs in it. And that's what gives it that body and also the color. When we think of the yolks and that beautiful color that they have, that they provide for desserts, right? So here I'm using the juice and the zest in this recipe. So if you're thinking, Emily, you're adding acid to the eggs, what's going to happen? Well, we'll mix them and you'll find out. So I'm going to add some zest first. And what I've done is washed my lemon zest or lemon fully, and then we're just going to use the zest. So I'm just using my microplane. If you have a fine grater, that will work too. If you have an old school zester where you're taking the strips of the lemon off, that will work, but then just give it a nice little fine chop so that you have little pieces of lemon zest going in. So you can see what it does here is it just takes off that top part of the zest, leaving the pith behind, and I have that beautiful fine zest. We only need about half a teaspoon for the recipe. I'm going to add that right in there, okay, and then give that a whisk. And by the way, if you think that I've been remembering this recipe just out of, I haven't. My recipe's right here. For those of you that have been to the webinars before, you know that I do not go far without the recipe in hand so that I don't forget things, okay? So next is, I'm gonna add the seasoning next, which is just a little bit of salt and pepper. Now, if you wanna hold off on the salt, you totally can. Again, if you're watching your sodium intake, you have a couple of options here by the broth being one of them, and then holding off on the salt that you're adding into the soup as well, okay? But I'm gonna add just a quarter teaspoon of salt and pepper, and I'm gonna use fresh ground pepper in here. So most people know how many twists it takes to get their quarter teaspoon. And if you like a little extra black pepper, by all means, you can add a little bit more. And then I'm going to add my lemon juice. So it's fresh lemon juice. Okay, so I had a few lemons. I've already squeezed some here, but because you need the lemon zest, you have to pick up a fresh lemon anyway. So you're going to squeeze the juice as well. And here we're going to whisk in 3 tablespoons of lemon juice. So I'm just going to take a tablespoon at a time and whisk this. I'm going to switch hands here. Not very good with my left. There we go. Okay, there's 1, 2. Now, here's where you have another option. If you're worried that this is going to be a little too zesty for you, you can hold off and do 2 tablespoons of lemon juice and wait for that third if you want to add it later. I really love the flavor of lemon coming through in a soup like this. And again, the marriage of the lemon and the eggs is really, really nice. Okay, so I'm going to add that 3rd tablespoon in there. And that's what's great about lemon juice is it's used as a seasoning in this soup. So oftentimes we think of it as a flavor, which you definitely will get that flavor. But in this case, it's also being used kind of like a salt, pepper, or spice or an herb. Okay, so this has been simmering probably for the right amount of time. And now I'm going to add our kale and our red pepper in here. Okay, so the kale, really, I love a little bit of that texture of it. So it only needs to cook for a couple of minutes till it's wilted. Okay, you'll notice if you're using the any frozen kale or spinach or whatever you're using, it will definitely take a little less time than that 2 minutes because it's basically already been blanched. It's already been wilted in the freezer. Okay, so we just want to get this nice and I'm going to try to pull up some of this quinoa bits here. Should have done it before I added my veggies just to show you. There, I'm going to move some of the kale and bring the spoon up a little bit closer here. Okay, I don't know if you can tell there on the spoon itself. Do you see the quinoa? How it has those little white bits there? It's kind of opened up and cooked. So that's one way to recognize that it's nice and tender. And in a soup like this, by all means, you can taste it. And then you'll be able to see, is it still a little bit crunchy? In most cases, that 10 minutes is all it needs, but it will cook a few more minutes as we add the rest of the ingredients. All right. Tracie, are there any other questions?
Excuse me. Yes. So you're kind of answering it now. Somebody did want to know, what does temper mean? And so let's just talk about the soup for a second. if, like you said, it didn't exactly go to plan and you tried to temper because you need to warm up the egg a little bit, otherwise you will have a scrambled kind of shaggy egg. It actually just gives you, right? Like you're biting into the egg, which is delicious.
Mhm.
So I think you're going to show that now. But the point of the egg in the soup is we want people to cook and use ingredients that they can have more than one purpose for. So by using the egg, you're making it velvety, but you're also adding the protein and all those other nutrients we need. So just a little point about that. So I'm going to leave the temper because you're going to chat about that. Let me just see what the other questions are. Yes, you can use carrot strips instead of red pepper for color, but Emily, as she was saying, um, you can basically, you should put them in sooner unless you like crunchy. It's really what you want. But to get them cooked down a little bit, you want to put your hard vegetables in right at the beginning.
Definitely. And
Yeah.
I was also thinking if you have, like, I'm a big buyer of coleslaw mix. I keep it
Oh,
on
yes, we've
hand
used that
and
in other recipes. How easy
exactly.
is that?
And you don't even have to chop anything. So that one I would add a little bit sooner too, because there's carrots in that mix. So you
Yeah.
could do a cabbage, it's the red and green cabbage with the carrot, and that I would let cook just a little bit longer than the kale and the pepper. And that would be a great one too. So again, soups are fabulous
Soups
because
are
you can
amazing.
clean out your crisper, clean out the fridge, clean out the freezer. And then even if you're incorporating something like this mixture of the eggs with the lemon, it can be varied. This can be so different in so many ways because lemon and eggs, they go together really well, but they also go together with vegetables really well. So you have, a long list of opportunity to create different flavors. And again, by using those eggs, you're getting the protein into a soup that perhaps traditionally might not have. If you're thinking of a vegetable soup, it might not have enough protein in it. So here we're bumping it up big time with the eggs. And then the quinoa helps a little bit in there as well, which is great.
I'm going to ask you one more question and then I'm going to go off camera and you're going to keep going. But we generally like to try to do recipes that we can say, and then you can put it in your freezer. But because when I make soup, I like to make a lot and then put it in little bundles and be able to grab either just the broth or, whatever kind of soup I'm making. This is actually the exception to what we normally like to do. So Emily, take
Well,
it away.
you
Right?
can still freeze it. Let's be
You can.
clear, you can
Yes.
still freeze it. It's just it'll change the texture of the soup. So when
Yeah.
you take it out and reheat it, the egg will split a little bit, so you'll see that separation. It's still going to taste delicious.
Yeah.
It just may not be what it originally was. And oftentimes that's the goal in freezing, especially with the Osteoporosis Canada recipes. We want you to have the experience as if you were having it fresh, frozen. So this is one where it does change a little bit. The good news is that it only makes 6 cups of soup. It's not a large batch soup, and you can have it enjoyed in a few days. It'll sit beautifully in the fridge for about 2 to 3 days. And you can have it as a snack. This one's a great one to pour in a mug and just kind of, if you're at your desk working, and enjoy it as a snack in the afternoon or a light lunch, or even if you get home late from work. This is something great to have, at the ready and just warm it up and enjoy it.
When you get that 3 o'clock little munchie that you're going, oh, I've done the soup in the mug. Absolutely. All right, I see we're gonna start tempering. So
We are going to start tempering. So what I'm going to do here is, and there's a few things that you can do to help you out. So if you're worried about, your bowl, going all over the place while you're whisking, you can just make a little nest here because it's going to be a little bit of a one-handed um, whisk action. So you don't want your bowl to go all over the place. I am going to take some of the broth and try not to drip it too much. And then come on over here. This is the tempering. Okay. So this is where you introduce some hot this is a room temperature egg mixture. And you notice I'm not doing this very quickly. I'll just move this a little bit forward so you can see what I'm doing. I'm not doing this. I'm not letting the ladle of broth go in there. It's just more like a little drizzle to acclimatize and get the same temperature of the eggs. And usually about a ladle full is enough to bring it to temperature. If you're worried, by all means, you can go back in and get a little bit more, which is what I'll do, okay? And it's okay if some of the vegetables go in there in the quinoa, because guess what? They're all going to be married in that soup anyway. Okay, just like that. So this is doing two things. It's tempering the egg. It's also starting the cooking process of the egg itself. Okay. Eggs cook super, super quickly. So we often think that, oh, we have to cook them and cook them and cook them. You don't. They cook really, really quickly. And this heat has started to cook them. And now I've turned off my heat. This is nice and warm. And now I'm going to drizzle this, because I've tempered it, into my pot of soup. Okay. And if everything works out well, we should have a nice creamy looking soup. So I'm just going to start stirring this in like that. Okay. And automatically you'll see that the color of the soup changes because it has that beautiful creaminess. But now you can see what that smoked paprika has done. It's given us this kind of nice rosy colored soup, which is beautiful. And if I lift up a ladle here, and take a good look at that, it's a nice creamy soup. It almost looks like I added cream, but I didn't. I added protein with the eggs. Okay. And then just sitting here on the heat, the eggs are cooking through. And as easy as that, it's ready to serve up, which again, I told you this was going to be fast. It probably took longer than it will take you at home because I was talking the whole time. So then you're just going to take a nice ladle full of this soup. Okay. So this is something that I love. This is a great starter soup if you want. So, if you want to extend it, if you're having friends and family over and you want to have a nice little bit of soup before your meal, this is a great one to have. This is a great soup and salad combination, or soup and sandwich, so that you can have a cup of soup and half a sandwich or something like that. If you're getting together with friends, it's really just that simple. I feel like it's almost too simple, but I know that we talked about a lot of things, so there might still be some questions, Tracie, that hopefully the tempering made sense to everybody.
I am just taking a quick look here. So somebody did ask that they find sometimes when they eat. Oh, hi, Christine. I know Christine. When they we have a lot of return people and people who volunteer for us. So the kale can be a little hard if you find like it's a little hard on your digestive system when it's raw. Cooking can help, but if you're still finding it's too much, like that's when I would say spinach or other things. But Emily, like how much would you have to cook the kale, do you think, to make this a little bit easier?
So if it's easier, for you to enjoy a true cooked kale, I would get the kale in right from the beginning,
It's a good
right?
idea.
Because we're letting that cook for about 10 minutes before we even add that kale. So if you get it in from the beginning, it needs that time to come up to the boil and simmer for 10 minutes, and then you can add your peppers and then your egg. So it's getting close to 15 minutes of cooking time. And if that is not enough, you can actually blanch it prior. You could even use leftover cooked kale. Let's say you made a sauteed kale with garlic and red pepper flakes, and you had some left over as a side dish, you can use that and then it'll continue to cook. So you can also add other ingredients to it. So I just said sauteed kale and garlic. You could totally add that combination in here too. It will work really well, but I don't want to use anything too big. So if there was a lot of garlic or a lot of hot pepper flakes in something, it'll take away from the lemon. And
Yeah.
that's really what we want to showcase here, is that kind of, this is a great kind of think of spring, get you in the mood for warmer weather, because it's quick and easy, but it does have the lemon tends to do that. It does kind of brighten things up and it makes you kind of feel good.
It really, and adding like a little bit of acid at the end to a dish just kind of brings up that flavor note a little bit, I find. So, but again, I'm with you. I love the lemon. There was somebody just said they love your tulips. So I think you're just bringing out spring vibes. So, couple of things. So, Emily, what do you think? Let's say you had some leftover roast chicken or roast pork. you could actually bump this up enough and make it really satisfying by like just kind of shredding it up and adding it in right at the end. Like, what do you think?
Definitely. Yeah, you could totally do that. You could add any leftovers. I was also thinking if I had like sweet potatoes, leftover
Oh,
sweet
yep,
potatoes would be really
yep.
nice in here just to warm through. Even if it was mashed potatoes, believe it or not, just crumbling some up in here would give it a little bit more kind of a filling soup vibe. The other thing that you could do, and I love doing this with soups, I do it with rice, I do it with noodles, is poach an egg and get one in there. So
Oh,
you're bumping up the protein that way as well, and then you're adding more creaminess to it. And then I love serving these kinds of things with crusty bread, whether it's fresh out of the oven, off the grill pan, or just, fresh from the bakery. It has
I'm
that
with
nice
you. Bread
crunch.
on the side. There, bring it on. That's a delicious meal. We did actually have somebody ask. Now, let's say you wanted to bump up a little bit more calcium. Would you add milk? That's what the individual asked.
So what I would do is, if you wanted to up the calcium a bit, you can replace some of the broth with milk. I would use a fuller fat milk, so 2 or 3% milk. And then this is where you have to introduce something to help keep it together. So that could look like cornstarch, for example, if you want to keep it gluten-free, or flour. And if you were not worried about fat content, you would just substitute cream for the broth. But really, to get kind of that same soft texture, milk is the way to go. So I would do kind of 4 cups of broth, 2 cups of milk. And then to those 2 cups of milk, add a couple tablespoons. And I don't mean add like stirring, I mean actually whisking in 2 tablespoons of flour or cornstarch. So it's like a slurry and it's nice and smooth. And then you slowly bring it up to heat with the broth, so that it doesn't have that kind of separated look to it, because milk doesn't have enough fat to keep it warm throughout. It will come back together. If it does split, it typically will come back together when you add the eggs because of that protein in there. They'll kind of all come together.
That's a great idea because a cup of milk has 300 milligrams of calcium. So if you were to add the 2 cups of milk in, additional protein, but also if you chose to add that, you're now getting, um, let's do the math, just like about 150. I know math on the spot, right? It's about 100 milligrams extra of calcium. I did do that right. So because it's a serving of 6. So, but that's a great question. And again, we want you to kind of like make it your own. But I think that the key things are how to temper the eggs, how to add them in. It's not the end of the world. What was the saying? Don't cry over spilled milk. Don't cry over a
Split
scrambled
eggs.
egg or like an untempered egg. It's all good. It's all good. But you know what we have to do because Emily's got to do that
Oh,
taste
I
test
do. I have to get a
on us
spoon.
because I'm going to tell you who's getting the apron, and I just want to share some upcoming webinars that we have. So Isabel Catling from Williams Lake, British Columbia. Congratulations. You are going to receive the Unbreakable apron. So I will email you after this webinar. How isn't that like I wish I had a bowl of that soup right now. That looks so good.
It is, again, it's a nice light soup. Don't think like, heavy vegetable soup. It's just
Yeah.
nice and light. And I really like the smokiness with the lemon. I think it's just a unique flavor. I feel like maybe it's bringing me to Spain.
Is it bringing you to Spain?
It's bringing me to Spain. It's got Spain feelings in this flavor right
I
now
think
to
that
me.
sounds great. We should do that. Let's go do it from Spain. Oh my gosh. Well, listen, we want to thank everyone. I'm going to share my screen. I know, oh, you're very welcome, Isabel. She's saying thank you. I actually have one last question, and I do feel like this is important. So, would you use the bottled lemon juice versus a freshly squeezed lemon? I would use the fresh one.
I'm pretty sure that I was very specific when I said
I heard you say it, but
you have to buy the lemon
yeah.
in order to get the zest. So use the juice. Okay. This is going to give you the fruitiness behind the lemon as opposed to just the acidity or astringency that you might get from a bottle. And that's all I'll say about that. So
Oh,
yes, fresh lemon juice is the way to go for this soup.
I,
If
I,
you're
I,
seasoning any soups and you do want to add some light flavor to it or lighten it up, brighten it up, lemon juice is the way to go, but preferably fresh if you can.
I think that's a great idea. So I am just going to quickly share, if I can find it here, my screen. There we go. So just want to let you know we have some new recipes. They are on the Osteoporosis Canada website. They are going to be featured in some future communications and on our social channels. And as you can see, there's the recipe for the quinoa soup, the smoky lemon egg and quinoa soup. So definitely check them out. We have more coming. And our next webinar, so Tuesday, February 11th, is our next webinar, and it's what to expect after a hip fracture. Dr. Jenny Thane will be presenting, and if you go to osteoporosis.ca/event, or just on the homepage, it's on the homepage, you can click it, you can register. That's the next webinar. Now, coming soon, this is not yet on the website, but this will be online within the next week. We are going to be doing a webinar, Eating on a Budget. That, we don't have a date yet, but that will be before the end of February, likely. We are doing another cooking demo, homemade biscuits. It's going to be a fun one on February 13th, so that will be coming on as well. And an in-person event, if you live in and around the Winnipeg area in Manitoba, we're going to be doing an education event on March 12th. So all of this is coming. If you register for the e-newsletter, you will be getting that directly to your inbox. And you can register and get your tickets for each of those things. So keep checking. And again, please, visit the website, get the nutrient calculator. We are working on making this available on app stores so that you can download the app. We're not there yet, but for right now, you can use the desktop version. This is being recorded, so you will get the OC replay in your inbox. But if you are looking for older webinars that we just did the last few weeks, you can visit the OC replay webpage. Like we did this webinar on biosimilar for patients on denosumab. And we also have our podcast. We have new podcasts coming. So much information. Please visit our website. And we want to thank you. Thank you to our partners, because without our partners, we would not be able to put on all of this fantastic programming and provide information, tools, and resources that we all need to help optimize our bone and muscle health. So thank you to Get Cracking. And of course, our friend Emily, thank you so much. And we want to thank you. We have so much fun with everyone who comes on our programs here for the Cook with OC program. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. Again, if you haven't, please subscribe. And you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and actually also on LinkedIn. So have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you so much, and happy cooking. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.